somewhere beneath the streets of one of the most beautiful cities in the world, beneath the cafés and the flower markets, beneath the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, there is another world, a world of darkness, bone, and silence. A world that most Parisians walk over every single day without giving it a single thought. The city above was built on a foundation of death, and the deeper you go, the stranger and darker the story gets. This is the story of the Paris Catacombs, but it is also something more than that, because what lies beneath Paris is not just a burial site. It is a mirror, a reflection of everything the city has ever tried to hide. Let's go back to the beginning. Not to the 18th century, when the catacombs as we know them were created, but much further, to the Romans. When the Romans founded the city they called Lutetia around 52 BC, they immediately began to quarry the soft limestone bedrock beneath it, dense enough to build with, soft enough to carve. For century after century, workers descended into the earth and hollowed it out, block by block, to build the city above, the streets, the churches, the palaces. Virtually everything standing in Paris before the 19th century was made from stone, pulled out of the ground directly below it. By the Middle Ages, the quarry network had grown into a vast, unmapped labyrinth, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, and nobody, not the city, not the church, not the crown, had any real idea of what was down there. Then, on the night of December 17th, 1774, the ground gave way. A stretch of the Rue d'Enfer, which, with dark irony, translates to Street of Hell, simply collapsed. Buildings fell. The earth swallowed entire sections of the city. The city was hollow, and it was beginning to cave in on itself. King Louis XVI appointed a man named Charles Axel Guillaume as Inspector General of Quarries. His task: map the underground, reinforce the tunnels, and prevent Paris from swallowing itself. What Guillaume found was extraordinary. Tunnels running for somewhere between 300 and 500 kilometers beneath the city. To this day, no one is entirely sure of the full extent. But solving the structural problem was only the beginning, because Paris had another crisis, one that was, in its own way, even more disturbing. The city's cemeteries were overflowing. The largest of these, the Saints-Innocents Cemetery near Les Halles, had been in continuous use for nearly 10 centuries. 10 centuries of the dead layered on top of each other in a space barely larger than a city block. By the late 18th century, the soil was saturated completely. Mass graves were dug and filled and dug again. The earth had become a kind of putrid paste. Neighbors reported that basement walls oozed decomposed human matter. And in the hot summers, disease spread outward from the cemetery like a slow, invisible tide. The solution, when it came, was as practical as it was macabre. Beginning in 1786, the bones of the dead, millions of them, were exhumed and transported by night, by torchlight, in carts covered with black cloth, accompanied by priests chanting the office of the dead. They were brought to the old quarry tunnels and deposited there. At first, the bones were dumped unceremoniously into the tunnels. But in the early 19th century, under the supervision of Louis-Étienne Héricard de Thury, something changed. The bones were arranged deliberately, artistically, almost reverently, into the stacked walls and decorative patterns that visitors see today. Femurs and tibias in neat rows, skulls placed at regular intervals like dark ornaments, entire walls of human remains, stretching corridor after corridor. And above one of the main entrances, someone carved a warning into the stone. Arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort. Stop, this is the empire of the dead. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. The ossuary contains the remains of approximately 6 million people. 6 million. The entire population of Paris today is roughly 2.5 million. The dead beneath the city outnumber the living above it by more than double. Some of the skulls lining those walls belong to people who died in the Black Death. Others to aristocrats guillotined during the Reign of Terror, their heads detached by the blade and later gathered up and brought underground. The bones of the famous and the nameless lie mixed together. In death, Paris made everyone equal. But here is where the story takes a turn that most visitors to the official ossuary never hear about. Because the ossuary, the clean, well-lit, ticketed tourist attraction, represents only a tiny fraction of the tunnels beneath Paris, the real catacombs are something else entirely. The full network, still largely unmapped and partly unstable, runs beneath the city like the root system of some enormous underground organism. And for centuries, it has attracted people who are not supposed to be there. They are called Cataphiles. They enter the illegal portions of the tunnels not to sightsee, but to live, for a time, entirely underground. They navigate by hand-drawn maps passed between trusted members of the community. They know the tunnels by names that appear on no official document. The gallery of the broken chair, the room of the marble bridge, the cathedral. The practice was officially banned in 1955. But the police unit tasked with patrolling the tunnels, known informally as the Cataphiles, is small and the tunnels are vast. Over the decades, what started as exploration evolved into something far stranger. People threw parties underground, real parties, with generators, sound systems, hundreds of guests. In 2004, police discovered a fully equipped cinema in a cavern beneath the 16th arrondissement. A screen, a projector, a bar, a working kitchen. When they returned 3 days later with a technical team, the equipment was gone. A note had been left behind. It read, "Do not try to find us." Rooms had been decorated by anonymous artists. Murals, sculptures carved into stone. One chamber containing an elaborate nativity scene made entirely from bone and rock. No one ever claimed credit. No one knows when it was made. During World War II, the catacombs became a battlefield, or rather, several battlefields simultaneously. The French resistance used the tunnels to move weapons, hold secret meetings, shelter fugitives. But the Germans knew about the tunnels too. The Wehrmacht established bunkers and command posts in sections of the network, which means that for a period during the occupation, resistance fighters and German military personnel were both operating in the same labyrinth, sometimes in corridors no more than a few hundred meters apart, each unaware of exactly where the other was. After liberation, investigators found German inscriptions on walls, resistance codes scratched into stone, and in at least one tunnel section, the remains of individuals who had died underground during the occupation, their identities never determined, their final hours unrecorded by history. Let's go back one more time to 1793. The revolution is at its most violent. The reign of terror is in full force. The bodies of the executed, among them Louis XVI himself and Marie Antoinette, were buried in mass graves covered in quicklime. Later, their bones too were moved underground. There is something profoundly strange about that. The King and Queen of France, who lived in Versailles, surrounded by thousands of courtiers. Their bones now rest mixed with the bones of plague victims and medieval peasants, people whose names no one ever thought to record. In the dark galleries beneath Paris, the Ancien Régime dissolved completely. The revolution that killed them finished its work underground. Paris has always been extraordinarily good at aestheticizing its darkness, at making the terrible beautiful. The ossuary is perhaps the purest expression of that instinct. You take 6 million corpses and stack their bones into decorative patterns and charge admission, and somehow it works. Somehow the sheer weight of human mortality, arranged just so, becomes something approaching art. But step into the unmapped portions of the network and the aesthetics fall away. Down there, Paris is not beautiful. It is raw. The walls are rough and damp. The silence is total, a silence so deep and complete that visitors describe it as having a physical quality, like pressure against the ears. The only sounds are dripping water and, occasionally, the distant rumble of the metro, the trains of the living world, impossibly far away. Cataphiles who spend extended time underground describe a distinct psychological effect, the loss of all sense of time, a heightened awareness of the body, and a feeling that is difficult to articulate, a sense that the boundary between past and present becomes somehow less certain, that the dead in that particular darkness are not entirely absent. Whether that reflects something real or simply the effect of sensory deprivation, that is a question the catacombs do not answer, they only ask it. In 2017, a 7-year-old boy became lost in the tunnels. Emergency services spent 3 days searching before finding him alive. 3 days, alone in the dark, surrounded by the bones of 6 million people, beneath one of the most densely populated cities in Europe. The catacombs remain, in many ways, unknown. In 2020, construction workers on the Grand Paris Express metro line broke through into a previously unmapped chamber. Walls no one recognized, corridors running off in directions that appeared on no plan. Work stopped. Archaeologists were called. What they found has not been fully disclosed to the public. That is perhaps the most unsettling thing. Not the bones, not the history, not the darkness. It is the simple fact that after centuries of exploration, after all the mapping and the research, we still do not know everything that is down there. The city above has been documented to exhaustion, every building catalogued, every street surveyed. But the city below, the one that was built first, the one the living city rests on, remains in its deepest reaches, beyond knowledge. And perhaps it prefers it that way. Paris has always kept secrets. The catacombs are simply the most literal expression of that. The shadow city made physical, the underground made undeniable. Next time you walk the boulevards of Paris, past the brasseries and the bookstalls, past the tourists photographing the Seine, look down. 6 million people are beneath your feet. The city you can see is only half the story. The other half is in the dark, and it has been waiting there for a very long time. Every week, we go beneath the surface of history to find the stories that got left out, the ones that are uncomfortable, the ones that matter. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave a comment below. Which city's hidden history should we uncover next?